Afternoon. So, welcome to the Open Textbooks panel. This is the last, I believe, scheduled concurrent session for the day. Hopefully you're all feeling somewhat awake. This will not be a sit and watch and listen session. Ideally, we're going to have a few brief introductions from our panelists, as well as some just basic statements about their backgrounds and what they're doing. It's worth mentioning that sprinkled among you in strategic locations are other people who also have expertise in open textbooks and similar kinds of things. And so ideally, just start asking questions. The point here was to create a space where this whole issue of open textbooks can just be part of a dialogue, right? And we really have a diversity of interesting projects and backgrounds represented up here. And rather than butchering all of their various relationships and such, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Ash Bissell from Creative Commons, and somehow I ended up being the moderator here. So I'm going to try to moderate.
Hi, my name is Murugan Pal. I'm co-founder of an organization called K12 Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to provide universal access for K through 12 students, free curriculum materials which are high quality as well as standards aligned. So currently we are focusing on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics curriculum. And yesterday we just announced that, under Governor Schwarzenegger's initiative, there were 20 books that got submitted to, California high school curriculum. These are all open, free textbooks. And out of that, 10 books met their standards. We submitted 7 among that 20, and then 6 of our books met their standards. So you can take a look at our website called www.ck12.org. And our technology is something called Flexbooks, where you can take different materials, rip, mix, and burn, and produce, PDF materials which can be viewed online, or can be printed at home for free, or can be printed at Kinko's and you can pay directly to them, or on an on-demand print environment. All our materials are high quality and standards aligned.
Great. Thanks, Morgan. My name's Eric Frank. I'm co-founder of Flat World Knowledge. We are a privately held venture capital-backed, for-profit open textbook publisher. We came out of a background of long time of textbook publishing with Pearson and McGraw-Hill and Thompson, concluded the market was really broken and that we needed a new approach. And what we do is sort of expert authored textbooks, so still go out to top scholars in the world, renowned in their field, provide all of the resources to develop the book, from illustration to accuracy checking, peer review, etc. But when that book is ready, we make it openly licensed under a variation of a Creative Commons license, allowing faculty to modify it for their own purposes. And we provide online tools to make that easy to do. So one can go online, move things around, delete things, edit things, and change the textbook. When it's ready for a class, it's available for free online to students in that class. And our business model is to say, hey, around that free version are a bunch of convenient formats you may wish to pay a reasonable cost for. So for $30, a student can print out a black and white textbook and have it shipped directly to them. For $60, they can get a full color version of a textbook. They can get an audio book by the book or chapter. They can get it on a handheld reader, etc. And we also sell study aids around that. So the student can buy from a variety of things. And then we have a social learning platform. So people are reading online. They can collaborate with one another, chat with one another, share notes with one another, etc. So that's fundamentally what we do.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Barbara Illowsky, Professor of Mathematics and Statistics at Anza College. I am also co-author of an elementary statistics book, Collaborative Statistics, that was used successfully at a few community colleges for about a dozen years or so. I got very involved with the open educational resource movement and originally had donated my college lesson plans and videos that were captioned and could be downloaded for the iPod, and it was the very first complete college course available on iTunes U for free, and that's out of colleges, community colleges, and universities. I then was very excited once we started. CCC OER was the first project director. The current project director, Jackie Hood, is sitting in the audience over there. My textbook now, after being used at a few colleges for about a dozen years, is now hosted on Connections and is been gone from a few colleges to 36 or so colleges internationally being used. We've just finished the first year. It's available completely free as a PDF download or chapter by chapter as Word and PDF downloads. You could also print modules, print part of it, print all of it, or if you want a hard copy, you can, again, similar to CK12, you can print it on your own. But given that it's over 600 pages, you can print it. You can purchase it for $32 through Coop, which is less expensive than printing it on your own, unless you do what just a few of my students do, which is print it at work when the boss has gone home. Most of my students actually do not print the book, and they use it online. I first got involved because of the savings of students and teaching at a community college, and maybe some of you have heard that California has a little bit of a budget problem, and I was interested in serving the poorest, financially poorest students and having free education for them because our tuition is not what costs the money for the students. I got interested in it, though, for that reason, but then completely enthralled and excited because of the increase in learning for students. I've now worked with reading specialists who have told me that because of the way Connections has hyperlinked the glossary so that the mouse goes over the words and the definitions pop up instead of flipping to the back in a linear fashion, students with reading difficulties, which is the majority of our community college students, have a better learning with it. Also, the book has improved by people internationally sending me comments and suggestions. Rash asked me to what would I say if I just had one PowerPoint slide that I could put up, and here's what I would say. We've used the textbook in the OER format for one academic year, starting last fall, and we just finished in June. We're on the quarter system. One college, Anza College, one course, elementary statistics, one textbook. We've saved just our Anza students over $250,000 in one academic year, not including the summer, not including any of the other 33 colleges and universities that are using the textbook, just at our one school alone. So that's my slide.
My name is Steve Acker. I'm currently the research director of the eText Ohio project for OhioLink. And OhioLink is the consortium under the Ohio Board of Regents which coordinates and purchases scholarly materials for 88 libraries in the public library system in Ohio. One of our questions is whether or not there's a similar role that this agency might play in the area of textbooks. I got here from a faculty position at Ohio State University, where the last two courses I taught, which was winter of 2008, one was called The Future of the University, and the other was called Expressing the Future of the University. And the structure of the courses was based on this principle of heutagogy, and heutagogy says, don't teach what's important to you, teach what's important to them. What was important to these students was their education at the university. So the structure of the course was purchase one copy of Wikinomics, turn it into a library book available to the students, create 3 streams of content. One of them was this shareable book. The second was the series of Innovation by the BBC, Peter Day. And the third was TED Talks. So there were 3 distinct structures of information the students used in the Future of the University course to build their own future of the university, presented by the students in the web development class, all of using the O'Reilly courses which had been licensed by the state. The outcomes of that, for me, was this notion of the importance of open educational resources is the affordability. That's our hook to the politic, but it's the improved learning outcomes. It's in essence what this is all about, and that's where the long-term savings are going to show up. So my role at OhioLink is to use the banner of affordability to bring about changes in modularity, additionalist content, and materials that can be incorporated into the specific local environment for the most success. And that's my long slide. My apologies.
That was a good one. My name is Cable Green. I'm the e-learning director at the Washington State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. So in Washington, we've got 34 community colleges, 2-year public institutions, and I work at an agency that the money from the legislature flows through us to the colleges, and we help set a lot of the policy for the state. And so I think the reason I was asked to be on the panel is we're about to embark on a project where we're going to redesign our 80 highest enrolled courses in our system. The other criteria that we use to choose those courses is they have lower than average completion rates. So as Steve was saying, improved learning outcomes is critical, and saving money is critical. Improving completion rates is also really important, as is improving participation rates. So to the extent that open textbooks lower the total cost of going to college, more people can access college in the first place. Barbara was mentioning California, correct me if I'm wrong, but their full-time tuition in the CTCs is roughly $900 a year, but textbook costs can be upwards of $1,000 plus per year. So it's just out of balance, and if in that case open textbooks can be used, you cut the total bill of going to college by half, that many more people get to go to college. So we're about to redesign these 80 courses. My one slide would be like Barbara's. We tallied up all the students that take those 80 courses. This is essentially our core curriculum in the CTCs. And then we used an average conservative costs of what the textbooks costs are in those courses. It's just over $42 million a year that our students are spending today to buy those textbooks. Our goal in the first year is to get about 20% adoption in the colleges of these redesigned courses, because one of the outcomes of these redesigned courses is that we will remove the $150 textbooks and we will replace it with books like collaborative statistics and other open textbooks that we can find and or modify to suit the needs of these courses. And where we can't find open textbooks that are of the quality or the fit that we need, we will put together course packs of open materials that our redesign teams put together and deem to be of high enough quality for the course that they're creating.
Great, thank you. So hopefully you're all already generating questions. I'm going to start off with one, and it's being motivated somewhat by Steve's comments, which is clearly a lot of the drivers for open textbooks come from transformations in the industry generally, right? Like what had been possible, not been possible before, is now possible in terms of distribution, but also old methods, right, business methods and so on, are largely breaking down, and the accessibility to education, especially when you consider these costs, has gone down as well. But I'm really interested in this connection between the openness of the resource and how that changes perhaps the way learning happens or the way teaching happens. And are we seeing any evidence, maybe on the policy level, maybe in terms of the messaging to professors, adopters, et cetera, on those parts of it? And if anyone wants to comment on that. Murugan raised his hand.
Actually, especially for K through 12, it's very important, because for higher education, it's much easier for the students to learn from the book in a textual manner. But in a K through 12 environment, the students themselves have two different capabilities. Either they are textual readers or visual learners. For visual learners, in these online textbooks, you can embed a YouTube video of a MIT physics lecture, and while they're reading the books, they can also watch these videos. That changes their total behavior. And the other thing that would happen is that, for the same empirical model or for the same concept, you can give two different practice set problems, one very difficult, one not very difficult. For example, if somebody is reading cubic polynomials, you can generate two different homework problems, x cubed minus 8 equals 0 or x cubed minus 729 equals 0. both of them are, one is the answer is 2, another one is answer is 9. So you can generate different sets of problems for the same student while the book is electronic and the empirical models are embedded within the system. And tertiarily, the parents can get involved in the process in a very live manner. For example, if a student does not understand a specific concept in a book, the teacher can annotate that particular issue as a yellow sticky pad, but in an electronic way, into that electronic book. And when the student comes home, the parent can read that notes, and they can also teach, in addition. So it changes the whole behavior totally. We have prototypes developed for that within our system. So it changes the whole, playing field in order to improve the educational system.
Now I've forgotten the question because I was so interested in Murugan's response. What was it again, Arash?
Wondering about the extent to which one of the strongest motivations towards being interested in open textbooks is becoming more and more the impact on teaching practice, on the way people learn.
Okay, so that's exactly true. I mean, as Steve said, the hook originally that got most of us started was the cost. And that was the same with me. But then what really has me excited to stay continued in it is the pedagogy and the learning experience, and also the way to reach students that they haven't. For example, I'll just do one example, then I'll go to the rest of your question. I think that having open textbooks has closed the digital divide, not opened it. And I know that when I first was discussing this, many people said, it's not right that you would have your book free on the computer, because then only students who have computers at home or internet access can get it. Well, so for the rest of the students, the less affluent students will have to pay the $32 for the book. So one of the things that I did was I said, look, I'll keep a stack of CDs in my office, and anybody who cannot afford the textbook completely and does not have a computer at home, can come in, get a CD, and go to the media center and just burn a copy of the book, and then they have the PDF file. But still, that goes back to me to be the linear fashion of learning, and I'm trying to encourage my students not to read the textbook in the hard copy and not to read it from the PDF file. It's much better learning-wise for them to go onto the online, see screen by screen. I mean, the beauty of it is that I can't take any credit at all. It's completely the Connections platform that makes the learning better. The way that they have it set up, the back and forth, the hyperlinks, and so on. I mean, that's what has increased the learning. And the students tell me that. They say, at first, and in fact, I think this has a lot to do with the way that the instructor teaches, and Connections did some studying on this, is that there are faculty who have the online version, but they don't let the students bring the laptops in class because they're afraid they're going to do what all of us are doing, and probably every person on a laptop now. Okay, I don't have to tell you what that is because you already know what you're looking up and what you're tweeting and what you're doing and so on. And I do the same thing. But to me, that's not it. They can get on the computer, they can be going back and forth, hyperlinking, checking things, going to another statistics site. If they don't like mine, they've got one window open and they can go to something else, and they can look up in Wikipedia, or they can look up in another program. The other beauty of it is some of the derivative products that can be made. Eric talked about some of the flat world stuff. The UC, University of California Office of the President, now that the book is licensed with a Creative Commons with all derivative works allowed, for profit or not for profit, the UC Office of the President has taken the book and they've combined this textbook with some media developed out of UCLA Department of Statistics, and they're making an AP course which will be freely available to all students who want to take AP statistics. The advantage to that part is, especially in the poor and less affluent and rural areas in California, there may not be credentialed high school teachers who are able to teach elementary statistics, for example, or any other class. And so the students are able to use this material. It doesn't cost them any money, and they can get a head start in their college. I mean, I think most of us have seen the movie Stand and Deliver a dozen or I don't know, maybe it's 70 years ago. I don't remember when it was, but it was very powerful, however long ago it was, about what leaving high school with some college courses can do, especially if you can't afford college. And so that derivative product is allowed to be there. In addition, maybe there's a credentialed teacher, but there isn't a whole class willing to take it. So you've got 3 people or 5 people, and they can all work and be helping each other. And so I think that's part of the pedagogy part.
It's been almost 2 years now that the state of Ohio has moved into something called the University System of Ohio. And in essence, it responds to this observation. The typical graduate of an Ohio college or university has attended more than one school. Less than 50% go to a single college. Consequently, it's the transition points between the moments in the higher education as well as K-12 where the friction in terms of student success lies. So a year ago, we put in a modest amount of money, $250,000 for 5 textbooks constructed by what are called transfer assurance guideline communities. And the transfer assurance guideline community says if your course meets these 8 learning objectives, the student who takes it at Cuyahoga Community College will succeed in going to Bowling Green State University because the course materials are covering the same stuff. Our question then with OER is, what do those learning resources look like that allows for the student to transit from learning environment A to learning environment B, such that that material A follows them, B is modular, and C isn't necessarily going to run into the restrictions associated with licensing. So I think that's one way that it's reinforced the focus on the student as learner rather than institution as provider of learning.
So can I comment real quick? So how does it change? I think it changes. Open content changes the conversation in the same way that participatory Web 2.0 technologies changed the conversation around who got to participate with technologies. So before we had Gmail that was free and lots of space, before we had access to blogs, before we had wikis and all that, there were gatekeepers called webmasters and the people who controlled the servers who decided what would get online and what didn't. We don't live in that world anymore, and now all of us in the room could set up a new blog in about 30 seconds flat, and it would cost us nothing. And that changes the conversation about who gets to participate with technologies and how we move ideas. I think there's the opportunity for that kind of transformational change with open content, and in fact, I think it's a responsibility that we have in higher education to weave that into our curriculum and our global expectations of our students before they graduate, that they be able to contribute to open content. I think we should have, if collaborative statistics is the textbook in my statistics class, one of the capstone assignments in my stats class should be make this open textbook better. Enhance this. Your assignment is to enhance Chapter 7 and make it better than it was before and contribute it to the Connections repository. And contact Barbara and give rationale for why you think she should make changes to her master copy, right? Because then what we're doing is not only teaching the students how to use the technologies that they're going to need to be global participants in conversations, but we're also putting on them the responsibility that they're not just passive recipients in the classroom, and we're not just filling their heads with collaborative statistics as we see it, but we're telling them that part of their job is to make it better. That, I think, is launching them into the global workforce with a set of skills that is very marketable and is going to serve them well as lifelong learners that for the most part we don't do today. We're just starting to figure that out in our community, but I think we can weave that into the curriculum, and that could be a real game changer.
Questions? Yes. Oh, you need this. I was just wondering if you could all comment, because you've all mentioned textbooks in your opening statement. I was wondering if you could comment on if the idea of a textbook is going to change, or if it's, how is it, will it stay the same? Is it evolving? Should we just get rid of the idea of a textbook?
Yeah, I engage in this discussion, quite frequently, and I think there's a general sense among what I think of as sort of avant-garde educationalists or teachers that the textbook is a dead idea. But I think that runs counter to what 95% of the actual educational community is doing. And in fact, as budgets get cut, as adjunct faculty teaching courses rises, dependency on something with structure and with sort of a framework for learning actually is increasing. I don't see it decreasing. So despite the availability of the web to deliver a nonlinear, much improved learning experience, pragmatic on-the-ground realities are actually driving up usage of these things in a way, which is sort of weird. I actually think that it absolutely will change. I think it already is, as people think about taking something like this with an open license, and you can explode it into its components and remix them, add your own things, annotate them, link out to things. That alone, embed media, that alone is starting to change what this is. I think the next act of that, and you referenced this, Murugan, is when you embed assessments along the way, and you can start to tell as a student's reading online where 67% of the students took too long to solve this problem or got this one wrong, and that starts to affect the learning cycle. We can improve that content. So something wrong with that. We learn something about those students that we can feed back to the instructor so the instructor can address it. And all of that is eminently doable, and I think part of the changing landscape of what a textbook will become. Last comment on this. I actually think that in some ways the textbook as we know it right now and the hook of affordability, if you will, is the Trojan horse for the next leap forward in actual education. And what I mean by that is, unfortunately, and I don't mean to offend any faculty in the room, but faculty, I think, tend to be incredibly conservative in the classroom and are probably slowing down greatly the potential for improvements in learning. But as a textbook becomes adopted because it doesn't change my life dramatically as a faculty member, it solves a problem of affordability for my students. It gives me the ability to do some little things like annotate it, which improve things along the way. Now we've got a carrier of improved educational possibility in the mainstream classroom. And that carrier can start to now actually reach out directly to the student as a consumer of the education and say, hey, try this simulation with some feedback. Hey, try this thing. Things that if you had given directly to the faculty member and said, use this simulation in your classroom, it would have never gotten through. That's too different. But all of a sudden it's there and there's data coming from it that can go back to the instructor who says, interesting, I didn't know that about my students. Maybe there's some real value in this. So I see textbooks as kind of where the market is, a great carrier of educational change inherent within it, and it allows students to actually, over time, start to take the lead in transforming what education really looks like for them. Sorry.
Sorry, this one I really have to jump in because that's why we named our books called flex books. They are not even textbooks because it's pretty flexible, right? So you can create your own flex books. But actually it's beyond that, is that the textbooks in itself, will change in the way that it will involve the students within that same system. For example, if you want to teach vector addition, the teacher can instruct the student to go to an airport with a video camera, and then the students walking on a conveyor belt. That's actually vector addition. When students learn in that kind of an applied learning within themselves, then it's much more easier for them to understand the concept. Even going beyond, you also want to palette the content, right? For example, if you want to learn about the specific definition of a physics concept called refraction, if that can be embedded in a Twitter account, it's much easier for them to understand rather than reading through a 600-page physics book before the exam, right? So there are ways to palette the content too. And then the third one is the applied learning. So that is also very important for them to apply their knowledge into specific areas into projects, etc., project-based learning. So that's how the books will change. But as Eric mentioned, it also depends on the last mile deliverer. That means a faculty who's teaching that particular class. If they never want to move away from the textbooks, that particular classroom is kind of locked into that kind of a mode, but that will change.
I want to add a little bit to what Murugan and Eric said, which are completely correct statements, and I agree with them. Well, that's why I know they're correct. But also, I wanted to sort of put in my reality, okay? The reality for me is if I didn't need a textbook, I wouldn't use one, even though I wrote it, okay? I would much rather have the links day to day of what's going on. And in fact, I do that. I mean, I have the textbook and the students are required to read and it gives structure. But when I'm teaching statistics, I don't teach out of my textbook. I'm looking at the newspaper articles, I'm looking at data and so on. The students are bringing in problems. Here's the reality though. California, which is California community colleges, which are my basis, have 2.7 million students. That's a lot of students compared to any other educational system. In order for our courses to transfer to CSU and UC, and then the private schools have their own set of rules, we have articulation agreements. And I just spent the past 6 months working on articulation between the community colleges and the CSU and the UCs for open ed resources. We seem to be the only state in the country, at least so far as I can tell, where the articulation agreement includes the textbook. It includes the student learning outcomes. It includes the table, the list of objectives. It includes the content to be covered, but it also includes the textbook. And in that articulation agreement, the CSUs and the UCs review the textbook and decide, will we accept the course? If I have no textbook and I have links to all these completely fabulous sites and simulations, it's an automatic litmus test. And there will be no articulation agreement for the entire college. So I need to have a textbook. The other part is the structure, and Eric alluded to this. We have 61,000 faculty in California community colleges. Of those, 43,000 are adjunct. And so 43,000 adjunct, many of whom teach at more than one college, are jumping from place to place to place. The only way we could get structure for just about anything was several of us, like for example in my department, but have done this statewide also, is we say, all right, let's pair up part-timers with full-timers and we'll work and write the same exams. And if we share exams and share office hours and stuff, then you have to keep up. Otherwise, we have no structure and we don't even know what's going on in the class. So that's another part of the reality. The truth is I would love to just have course materials and have them be simulations, have them be whatever we're doing, but I don't see that happening. We finally got the articulation agreements changed so that they include a place to include OER, and that was a big challenge. Fortunately, Merlot comes out of the CSU system, so we had some great people to work with on that. But so far as trying to we're just trying to train faculty to not teach at the blackboard and face the blackboard when they're teaching. They're teaching elementary algebra facing the blackboard and not turning around and talking to anybody. So we're trying to get good pedagogy. If we took away the textbook, I'll just pass it.
So I'd agree with my three colleagues in the sense that, in my view, the textbook will not go away in the short term. The way that the textbook is used will continue to change rather dramatically over the next 5 years. The first part will be to extract unnecessary material from the 10-week or 15-week course that I'm able to teach. The second will be to add, as you're suggesting. The third is to adapt. So I tend to think of the textbook as a scaffold, a Velcro scaffold, something that you throw something against. If I'm an experienced teacher, it's going to stick. If I'm a brand new teacher, though, I've got this scaffolding to help me through my capacity to become a better teacher. So yes, I think we'll have textbooks for the foreseeable future. I think the way they're used will change rather dramatically.
And I'd agree with that too. As we look at redesigning our courses and putting open licenses on them, the way that we're talking about textbooks is really in the broader context of them being instructional materials. And so we're working with our redesign teams and saying, if you choose to use a textbook because of the structure it provides and maybe there's a comfort level there, that's fine. If you choose to use a course pack and put together a set of resources that are more current than what this textbook is, that's great too. Or if you choose to do something else. So another good example is if you choose to sit down with the librarians and piece together library resources that we already have and pay for that are licensed copyrighted works but don't charge the students any more than what we've already paid for them as an institution, that's fine too. All we really care about is that you've got coherent, high quality, contextually appropriate instructional materials to reach the goals and assessments that you've laid out in the course. And so, so we're talking about textbooks just really as one component that's structured knowledge that then our faculty teams build and innovate on top of. I also think somebody, one of the founding folks from Western Governors University told me the other day that he uses the textbook metaphor when he's talking about open educational resources, and his phrase goes something like this: open educational resources or open courseware is the same as how you thought about textbooks yesterday. And what he's kind of getting at, this is Sam Smith. He was president of Washington State University and worked on WGU. And Sam's point is that today, if you're a faculty member and you think about a textbook, you say, well, yeah, it's helpful, it's structured knowledge, somebody else created it, it's something that I need to help explain the topic, and it provides some structure. Makes sense, right? We don't question that. That's something that we do, that we've done for decades now. And yet, when you hand a faculty member maybe an open course from another institution, the first questions are, well, how do I know if it's good? Is it quality? It wasn't invented here, right? We throw up a lot of barriers. And Sam's point is it's the same stuff. It's just other structured content, and is a course that's been put together really any different than a textbook that's been put together.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one part, and the other part is thinking about the student audience. How I teach my high-level courses and giving at a community college, this would be the calculus differential equations course, is it's so much easier to teach those courses than when I teach the developmental classes. And nationwide, community colleges, 70 to 80% of the students come in at a developmental level. So not only do the faculty need the structure, the students really need the structure. And so if I'm teaching differential equations, I don't think the textbook is nearly as important in having it as a textbook. The students can go online, they can search something, they can figure out how to do it. If I'm teaching high level, if I'm teaching elementary algebra to high achieving 7th graders, they don't need the structure either because they can go and search it. But when I'm teaching elementary algebra to 30 and 35-year-olds who've had it 2 or 3 times in high school and then have had it a few years later in community college and now are having it again, they need something to refer back to. So the textbook doesn't need to be the hard copy, but they need that structure in the online environment, even the electronic format, where they can say, okay, oh, I see, I have to go back to chapter 3. That's needed for that type of audience.
So I'm going to, I guess, a comment first. Given that this is the last session of the day, I'm going to recommend that if people feel they need to leave in 5 minutes at 4:15, you can feel free to trickle out. But I think I'm going to ask everybody to plan to stay seated until like 4:30 in case there are more questions. I'd also like to encourage people to just pick out somebody to answer the question. If you really want everybody to answer the question, go ahead and request that. And also feel free to ask a general question that anyone else in the audience might want to pop up and answer or have a conversation about. Yes.
John and Olson from California, and you had 6 of your books approved. Arnold Schwarzenegger came out with this idea when the state was in crisis. The thought that California would do something with digital textbooks a month before that was probably unheard of. And I guess last week, in addition to the announcement of the 10 books in your 6, the State Board of Ed released the K12 community from the requirements of adopting textbooks. The bad news is that history in California has stopped 10 years ago and will be another. We won't know about the Great Depression or Obama being elected. But they did do an opening, in a sense, by relieving the districts from doing those purchases. And it wasn't stated in the press release, but also essentially you're providing an opportunity that those districts could stay current without spending the money. This is an amazing change for California, which is not only a state but a state of mind. how rapidly do you think things can happen now? Nobody thought the car industry would change. Do we really have just a little crack and the whole dike's going to fall, or is it still going to be slow movement forward? I'm just curious how quickly you think things will change.
I think to quote the professor, I think Palmer from Stanford, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? It's an opportunity for anyone to make use of, especially this economic crisis. So yesterday there were almost 150 people who attended the session in the Orange County when the governor's staff, promoted this plan. Today, California spends around $350 million per year on K-12 textbooks. And that is 0.6% of the total budget of $101 billion. And then they already run under $41 billion deficit. So this $650 million or $350 million, originally they were actually spending $650 million. So it is going to be a big change for them. But still, this is only in the high school level. And it might... it may not change drastically. On September, it's not going to change. For sure, we know that. But definitely, it opens up more doors, especially from the staff, the governor's staff, as well as from the government. Now, all the superintendents, high school superintendents, as well as their technology departments, now they have a bona fide way to make use of it. Previously, they can never do that. It will become illegal. But now, they have a very bona fide way. But also, thanks to Obama, the initiatives like Department of Education's innovative technology grant, as well as Race to the Top grant, is actually promoting all the school districts, and then they are giving them funds to buy equipments, whether it's a netbook computer, those kind of equipments for the students to learn directly from the computers too. So that's another catalyst that will accelerate this progress. But I think beyond California, I think the most important point about this is the textbooks is also, especially the open textbooks, is just not the cost factor. Let me give you the example of Virginia. Okay, all of you are using computers here, right? But all of our physics books says that the main component in a display device is a cathode ray tube. How many of you are carrying monitors here? None of you. Everything is LCDs and plasmas. And this is the textbook all the children are learning in the high school level. And there is no contemporary topics on biophysics, imaging, etc. So Commonwealth of Virginia, got NASA and then conducted a study for 2 years. And then they found their physics materials to be obsolete for more than 40 years. Okay? And Virginia is the #1 state. You go take any particular textbook for high school. Can you find a topic on nanotechnology? You cannot, but the students must be taught. So they approached the publishers. The publishers wanted minimum 5 years and $5 million to develop some of these books. They found our system. The whole book was written at zero cost because 20 of the NASA scientists, college professors, and high school teachers came into our system. They collaboratively wrote the book in 3 months at zero cost. And Governor Kane launched the book on March 16th of 2009. And his Secretary of Technology, Mr. Anish Chopra, currently is the CTO for Obama in the White House. He is the one who spearheaded that thing, and it really was a successful thing. So this Virginia, they did one book, and then California is the first in the country to use these high school books, and they have gotten 20 books out of the system. So this will change. It's actually inevitable. It's not a matter of what, it's a matter of who and when. And that when is also coming.
I don't know if you want to have a
yes.
quick follow-up.
Just a quick data point. We had 750 students at 30 universities in a beta test in January. Classroom testing and giving us feedback on our platform and books. In February, we said, okay, we're ready to go. Opened it up, and we'll have 400 universities using open textbooks starting this past Monday. They started up 40,000 students and savings of over $3 million. And that was literally with 5 months around. There were really 5 open textbooks in the market at that point. So I think that the The bigger problem is supply. You know, I think the demand is there for a solution, and the rate limiting factor on growth is supply. And that's a hard problem to solve. So I think it's an issue of how does supply catch up with demand. And I think as demand becomes more evident, more players will come in and create supply, and we'll get there. But supply seems to me to be the biggest problem right now.
Another question.
Sorry, I was a little late, so I didn't know if you discussed the question of incentives. So how you get teachers and professors to contribute with books, and how you make open books, and how you make this contribution a part of their routine.
Did you all hear that? Question of incentives? Yes.
Well, I'm a textbook author, so I can discuss a little bit, although I had a little bit of a golden path, so I don't want to think that everybody would follow the way that I went. There are a lot of different ways. At the universities, we need to respect the OER publishing as part of the publishing. Right now, to get tenure at the universities, it's much more on the traditional type of publishing. But there are peer-reviewed online journals, and so that is an incentive, and peer-reviewed books, and we need to make sure that the universities take that into effect. And I think that's going to happen as things get larger and go along. I would hope that places like Rice University and Stanford would already have that in effect, because they're some of the leaders at MIT in open ed resources at the major universities. But that is one way. Another way is to get groups of people together to develop a textbook. I mean, Murugan said one way, of course, but that was distinguished scientists who were coming in, but still the same thing at a high school, college, junior high. Instead of sitting down and writing one text, and I can tell you it took forever, and we were always updating it, even as a co-author, where I have a Susan co-authoring with me, it does take a tremendous amount of time. But if you have a lot of people together and you work together on doing it, it's a lot shorter time, especially if you start pulling resources that are already there. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. If I were to do another text, I don't know what, let's say pre-algebra, I wouldn't start by writing it myself. I would first start by searching for everything that's out there and that's free, that has a Creative Commons license or is in the public domain, and pulling from that part. I also want to touch on one other part of this question, which wasn't asked, but I'm going to answer it anyways because it does relate. One of the parts of working together on the textbook and for example, my leadership role in it statewide and nationally is I feel there's been a tremendous increase in professional development of faculty that we've gotten out of it without going to conferences. So when we get groups together, let's say I was to start writing a new textbook now, and I said, oh, I want to write a text on, I don't know, feminist literature, for example. And I had a group, and this whole group just said, oh, wow, we really want to do that for the course because we're all teaching it, right? And we got together, we would end up having the discussions and the learning experiences that come through professional development on a much broader scale and more long-term than by going to a conference twice a year and learning the material. The same thing with developing any type of textbook or any sort of consortium that you get together. And I think that that's been the case, certainly with the collaborative statistics in my experience, that as I'm working with colleagues, myself, I mean, I've benefited tremendously learning from them, but also, especially I work with the part-timers and some of the full-timers, and we sit around and we discuss, well, what worked well in the class? Or it usually starts out with a gripe session. Somebody will come in, I can't believe this, da-da-da-da-da-da. And so we discuss it in an environment where we're not sitting here in professional development 101, for example, or staff development, but we're working together, we're sorting through problems, and hopefully our teaching becomes better, which hopefully means that student learning becomes better on that part. I've just started now on my own campus on starting to look at the data for increased success rate in the faculty who are using the online version, even though they already use the hard copy. Because what I'm wondering is if now by working together, that has at all done any improvement. But the sample size isn't large enough to do that. So I think that's one incentive. Certainly, the monetary incentive is the big one, but I know that for most ways that's not going to happen. And so working together and dividing up small chunks is really the way to go.
So let me answer it from the perspective of how do you get adoptions of open textbooks and how do you create them? Because I think that was a little bit of your question too. I guess bluntly put, if you've got the funds, you can pay for it, and to an extent, you just do it. So, in our lunch conversation today that George Siemens was leading, we were talking about policy, what policies need to be changed, and several people said, "Look, you just have to go do this stuff." So, I mentioned that we're going to redesign 80 courses. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go fight with different faculty about, are you willing to work on open textbooks? We're going to have an application process for who wants to be involved in the project. We're looking for the best and brightest math professors to redesign these 10 math courses, and one of the outcomes of this project will be that we'll have either open textbooks or sets of open instructional materials, and there will be Creative Commons licensing on it, period. It's not really up for discussion. Those are going to be outcomes of the course. Do you want to come play? And so there's no real discussion around that. These 80 courses will be open to the world. They will have open materials in them, period. Now the difficult discussion, I hope it's not difficult, but the discussion will be which colleges want to implement those courses and how high can we get those adoption rates. And so, we are preemptively being strategic around that by being very inclusive in the process, inviting faculty leaders, library leaders, the presidents, the trustees, the legislators, anybody who's a stakeholder in this, bookstore managers, to be involved in conversations now, because we want them to be bought in that this is a good idea so that the adoptions will be higher. But I think to an extent you can do some things structurally with policy, and if you've got some money that helps too, to just say, look, this is some of the box we're going to put around this thing to get to the goal we're looking for.
Just the one part I want to add to it is you don't need everybody to buy in, right? You just need a few people. So when I'm working on trying to do, when we were first doing the adoptions, we had 25 sections of statistics at our college. At the time, about 12 were using the hard copy version. Now about 20 are using the OER version. I didn't need to get everybody to adopt it. All I needed to get was a few people who wanted to work on it and who wanted to review it. And that's the same with any course. You have and especially when you do the high demand courses. English composition, you don't need the whole English department to go in. You need a few people who are willing to do it. Just like here. Look, here we all are. We're not representing all the people involved in education in the world. We're just representing people who are interested in this, and from here the ripple effect will go on.
Yes. Yeah. The K through 12 system is a lot different from higher ed. If somebody is really interested in understanding the K through 12 system, you can also catch me offline, because in higher ed the professors have complete freedom of picking any book that they want, but for K through 12 it's not like that. You go to federal government, they will say state government. You go to the state government, they will say school district. You go to the school district, they will say the school, and then you go to the school, they will say the state government again. So you will always be in a round robin, but you have to do more work. But there are plenty of additional ways of incentives that can be, even monetary incentives, that can be channeled to the actual contributors, irrespective of nobody making money. Because, there is $4 billion being spent on textbooks in K through 12 environment in United States. Now, if you bring it down to only 10% of it, there is still $400 million. And there are only even today in a textbook industry, 11.4% of the actual money is what is being paid to the authors. So you can take that government money, shrink it to 11%, and still all the contributors can make it money, provided they're willing to license it, right, under open license. There are ways to do it. You can catch me, because I don't want to waste other people's time.
So just one sort of different response about author incentives and how to get people to create. I mean, I'm not dogmatic about this. I think there are lots of ways to skin the cat, and they're obviously demonstrating themselves to be successful, different models of authoring. You know, when we started Flat World, we took the position that there's really nothing wrong with the current authoring process. In fact, getting one or two authors who have a coherent vision of what this should do, who can write a book that is consistent in tone, level, nomenclature, etc., across chapters, who can do that quickly because they have a financial incentive to get it into the market, and who will sustain it at a continuously improving level of quality over the years because they see improvements leading to greater sales. There's nothing wrong with that model. It gets things done quickly. It gets things done with very little complexity of trying to manage collaborative processes, etc. And we saw very little evidence that broad collaborative processes were leading to high quality, consistent textbooks. And so we made the decision that we're not going to throw the bathwater out, or the baby out with the bathwater, that let's retain what's working on the authoring side, but let's build a model that does generate revenue that we can then turn around and pay authors and create financial incentives to do it. And our experience so far is it leads to very quick development of very high quality books. And on the higher ed side, I think this is completely different on K-12. There's something to be said for the brand recognition of an author. So the incentive to get a well-known scholar in a field to write the open textbook, and then to let people take it apart and remix and remash and rewrite it, in essence. But getting that person on there leads to usage. We may not like that reality all the time, but it is absolutely true that many professors, in making that adoption, are associating themselves with a tribe, if you will. The tribe is the brand of the scholar of this book. And even if I took this book, and this was Phil Kotler, Marketing Management, and I took Phil Kotler's name off, and I put, this was contributed by 15 people, and it was the same exact book, and I put it out there in the community, Phil Kotler's book would get 85% of the adoptions, and this one would get 15%. And so, we have a perspective on this, which is generate revenues, pay authors handsomely for the work that they do, create incentives for them to do it well and do it quickly, but change the distribution, licensing, and interaction model.
Let me just, sorry, I don't want us to run too much over. So I'd actually love to just have you each, like 1 minute, think like 3 sentences, to say something back to everybody in the audience about, if this is a conversation, if we're all kind of interested in obviously the things that you've said and the developing landscape and everything, how do these people participate? What is the kind of feedback you're seeking? What is the kind of engagement that you imagine? Just a word or two each, and then we'll close.
I guess the one thing I'd say is don't try to do it alone. Don't try to create this stuff from scratch. If there's one thing we should learn about OER is that there's a lot of it out there. So don't try to recreate the content. And the other thing is don't try to do it alone. Join the consortia. So Barbara and then Jackie's in the audience here. Jackie, raise your hand. There she is. So they run some, if you're not familiar with CCC OER, get involved, get on their list. We have conference calls about every couple months, and it's really wonderful because it's like having this conversation on a conference call every few months, and you realize you're not having all these problems. I thank God every time I hear what California is going through about articulation transfer, that's not happening in Washington, but it's really great to hear them talk about it because then we can head it off at the pass before it happens. So, don't let this be the only time you're having the conversation. Stay engaged.
I guess what I would do in the very short term is I would privilege consumption over production. I think that we need to take the quote textbook, break it into its aggregate parts, as Eric suggests, farm those out to different colleges within the discipline. The discipline makes the adoption decisions, not the individual instructor, not the class, not the institution. It's the discipline. And it's a way to extend ownership of that open educational resource to the discipline that's going to get adopted more broadly.
Well, Cable said what I would have said, so thank you. And I think the part is to show your enthusiasm and your passion. Figure out what it is. I mean, for me, it started out because I was so concerned about the inequities in our students getting an education and not being able to afford the textbooks. But what it turned out to was such an excitement over the increased learning for all disciplines. And to go and say, all right, what is the big picture here? What do I really want? And just be enthusiastic about it. And then to surround yourself with really good people who make you look good. I mean, here I am looking good because Kathy Fletcher and Joel and other people made me look good. And so now I can come and speak, but to realize that we're all here. And also, every time, one of the things I love about the connections model, this is part of the last minute thing, is that every time somebody reposts, their name goes up on it. And people were saying to me, do you really want your book to be credited to Terry Teagarden, for example, because she wrote the Minitab manual and it says Terry Teagarden's name? And it's like, I don't care. There's enough credit to go around for everybody. And that's the point. We can share for everybody. It doesn't need to be my book. Actually, it isn't even my book anymore. It's actually the Maxfield Foundation's book. But really, it's not even that because it's in OER. And so the point is that everybody can take some credit and everybody can work together on this.
I'd say avoid dogma, focus on results, and the things that are getting results, do them more. I think that we, as a movement, many movements tend to break down themselves arguing with each other about how to do things when the problem that we're all trying to solve is still out there, and it's a big one. And I think that it's way too early for any of us to know how this is going to work, what works, what doesn't work. If my notion of branded authorship is wrong, I should change how we author books. If my choice of license is wrong, I should change that license. I think that we run the risk at this moment in time of losing focus on the prize, which is increasing access to high-quality educational materials and changing outcomes by arguing with each other over how to get there. So be pragmatic.
So let me be short. So consume the materials as much as possible, because I think, especially in K through 12 area and all, there are not any new materials that quadratic equations are being taught the same way for whatever the hundreds of years, okay? Second thing is that become a change agent. You can participate. It's all about one brick at a time. All you need is like review. You don't have to write a whole book. You can review 3 paragraphs in a book. That's more than enough. So if you fill your part, other things will automatically get filled. So you can become a change agent. You have come to this conference, so now you can go participate and further. And the third thing is that if you are a contributor, keep it simple. That means make the license model simply interoperate with other systems.